Hello, good morning. Welcome to Losing Louisiana. This is a week-long discussion about the loss of land, people, and culture that our city, our state is currently experiencing due to the climate injustice, due to the ravage of resources and of people that we just cannot seem to wrap our hands and our hearts and our minds around, which is why I'm so excited for the conversation today, because we are so blessed to have some frontline warriors who have never given up, who have strived and educated us on issues that are so critical to where we are in society right now that it begs for a conversation that has been too long denied. And we're especially excited to join this conversation with our cultural explorations. And before we get too far into the conversation, we're going to go to a land acknowledgement from Wood. And I'm so excited about the conversation. I forgot to even say who I am because it's not really that important. But I am Asali Devon Ecclesiastes, the CEO of Ashe Cultural Arts Center. And I'm so pleased and honored to have the folks on the Zoom today, Monique Harden and Logan Burke. But first, Wood, please turn it over to the land acknowledgement.
Okay, thank you, Asali. As always, we deliver a land acknowledgement to affirm the historical legacy of colonialism, honoring and paying respect to the land which was taken by conquest, along with the domination of the people who inhabited the land, and the imposition of white supremacy. We do it to raise greater public consciousness of Native sovereignty and cultural rights as a small step toward equitable relationships and reconciliation. As we gather on the ancestral lands of the Atacapa, Ishak, the Caddo, the Chitimacha, the Choctaw, the Homa, the Natchez, and the Tunica people, as well as the Petite Nation. We also recognize the Alabama, Biloxi, Coshada, and Ofo people, and others who were pushed into Louisiana from their ancestral land. We invite all in attendance to learn with us about the Native and Indigenous people, histories, and of present-day communities in Louisiana. And we do this in land acknowledgement not only to acknowledge the historical legacy of colonialism, but also to acknowledge the non-Western ways of knowing, right? That holistically link mind, body, and spirit, and that link the human and non-human ways. We acknowledge that the space we are in, the land we are on, are part of who we are and how we know the world. It's also necessary that we ask the questions of whose knowledge gets legitimized, whose knowledge gets honored, whose knowledge becomes part of our cultural legacy. And we also ask the questions on what participation did we play in the historical legacy of colonialism, right? And how we can think about a post-colonial world. So we give thanks to the nations, the tribes who were the original inhabitants of this land and who once occupied what is now Louisiana, and some of the original inhabitants of the Atchafalaya Basin, Mississippi River Delta, and the Gulf Coast. Give thanks for them and always pay homage.
Thank you so much, Wood. I have the honor and pleasure of introducing Ashe Cultural Arts Center's elder in residence, our guru of everything community and holistic, and just to illustrate the fact, her youngest grandbaby by her youngest son is joining us today in a true demonstration of the intergenerational nature of the conversation that we're having. And Mama Jamila Peters Muhammad will lead us through the conversation today.
Good morning, everyone. I am truly excited to be with you all today as we begin a conversation, as we say, long thought and long needed. As we look at today, losing Louisiana. When we look at losing Louisiana, we cannot forget all of the things that we lose. Not only do we lose the land, but when we lose the land, we lose the people. And when we lose the people, we lose the culture. And when we lose all of that, we've lost humanity. So I am extremely excited today for the panelists who are here with us. And I do bring my youngest grandson with me today, because I say to my people all the time, I don't drink bottled water as a whole because his great-grandchildren are going to find my fingerprints in their world, and it's not fair. So as we begin this conversation today, I'd like to introduce to you our masters, our queens, who will be bringing us words of wisdom about something, know your rights to renewable energy. Renewable energy, remember that word as we focus on this whole week. Just to know that New Orleans is the only city in the Deep South to support a renewable energy portfolio. You'll hear it referred to throughout this conversation as a REP. Today, we are here to learn more about that REP and how you, how we can become more involved in making this proposal a reality for our city and to create a landmark, not only for the Deep South, but for this country and those around the world. Today, we are honored to have with us Monique Harden. Hello, Monique.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Monique is the Assistant Director of Law and Public Community Engagement Program Manager, Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. Thank you for being with us today, Monique.
Thank you.
We're also honored to have with us Logan Atkinson Burke. Logan is the Director of Alliance for Affordable Energy. Welcome, Logan, and thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm honored.
So I'm going to step out and turn it over to those who know best what's going on. I hope that you get a lot from this and that you are moved to action. Thank you.
So, good morning again. My name is Monique Harden. I'm with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. We're based here in New Orleans, founded by Dr. Beverly Wright in 1992 to be a place where communities that are targeted for racially disproportionate pollution burdens and vulnerable to climate change can make the case for change that improves their health, quality of life, not only for themselves, but for future generations. I'm pleased to present to you today with Logan Burke at the Alliance for Affordable Energy, partnership and collaborative work she and I have been part of with a number of other organizations here in New Orleans called the Energy Future New Orleans Coalition. Energy Future New Orleans has made a proposal to our city council that is now under consideration. And what this proposal will do is set the right that we have as New Orleans residents to renewable energy. So what does that mean? What does that look like? And how does that shake out in the United States in terms of what is happening across the country with renewable energy standards will be discussed here today. And then we'll end with some conversations around what more could we be doing in the city to make this a reality. So if someone can show the presentation we've created for this session. Okay. So I'm going to minimize this. Okay. So next slide, please. So one of the things I find myself having to convey to folks here in the city is something that I didn't learn until I was well into my early 30s, and I'm past that age now. But it's the fact that we have something very unique in our city besides our incredible culture and culture bearers and artists. It is that we in the city of New Orleans actually regulate utilities. Might sound dry and boring, but what that means is through our city council, the issues around the cost of your electric and gas bills, the poles and the wires and transformers and the conditions of those things in our neighborhoods, as well as where our electricity comes from, how it's supplied and what amounts, all of those things are regulated through our city council. In the rest of the country, those kinds of decisions are carried out by public service commissions or public utility commissions, which operate at the state level. So what does that mean? That means the people we elect to serve on the city council, to work for us and work for our benefit, have this charge, have this power. Next slide. So given this power that we have as voters of people who serve on the city council, there's some really important questions we really need to think about. Why is it that we have the second highest energy cost burden for low-income households in the United States here in our city? We are second behind Memphis of all US cities when it comes to the cost of electric bills. So our Entergy bill, that more than 60% more than 60% of the customers of Entergy New Orleans pay, rank us that high among US cities, second in the nation. We are right now in the range of 18 and 19% of a monthly income of a low-income household going to pay for an electric bill. The national average is under 5%. So that's a huge a burden that so many people have, and it's a struggle every month to pay a bill. The answers in terms of why it's so high and what can be done about that rest in the power and authority that's within our city council. Another thing is, why do we have frequent power outages? It could be on a clear, sunshiny day, and you will be all of a sudden out of power, all the electricity is shut off. And that's because of aging, poorly kept, poorly maintained distribution system of wires, poles, and transformers. Why is that the case? Why is the maintenance, why is the upgrades not being kept at a functional level? Really rests in the authority of members of the city council. And then last but not least is, why is it that when you look at how the sources of where our electricity comes from, 95%, a little bit more than 95%, comes from sources like coal and gas, dirty fossil fuel energy sources, as well as hazardous nuclear energy. That's a lot of electricity that's being generated from sources that actually contribute to environmental racism. For example, Entergy companies here in Louisiana operate most of their generators next to predominantly African-American communities. So the toxic pollution, the burden of that health damaging levels of pollution that emitted into the air each time those generators are running to produce electricity, it creates this major social racial inequity, not just in the state, but you can see this burden happening around the country where power plants operate. It's in and next to African-American communities. We can do something about that in terms of changing those supply sources. The reason why this is such a problem for us is because while we have this right with our city council, many of us either don't know it exists or don't take the advantage of exercising this right at our city council meetings and with our city council members. We all have 3 city council members, 2 at large and 1 district member. How many times have they talked to us about reducing, lowering bills? How many times have they talked to us about moving to a healthier, sustainable, renewable energy sources or using energy efficiency and home weatherization? Those kinds of conversations are often not part of the constituency back and forth that happens in council chambers or on phone calls or meetings in neighborhoods. That's what Logan and I are here to try to change. We can make the change here. Next slide. If you look across the country, and here you see it depicted with certain states colored in shades of green and others in shades of in the gray color. What the dark green colored states are, and you can see that's the vast majority, are states where the right to renewable energy is enshrined, established by their state public utility regulators. The areas that are gray, it does not exist. There is no such right to renewable energy. This right to renewable energy is known as a renewable portfolio standard. What it breaks down to is the state requiring utility companies that operate within it to meet mandatory targets for increasing their supply of electricity from renewable sources like solar power or wind energy. The gray areas is where that kind of a standard does not exist. And as you can see, in Louisiana is one of those gray areas, but New Orleans can be the first. And as was said early in the introduction of this session, there's now for the first time a renewable portfolio standard with the opportunity for mandating targets for renewable energy and therefore setting and establishing, securing our right to renewable energy is currently before the City Council. Next slide. So I'm going to turn it over to Logan.
Thank you so much, Monique. I'll just let you know I am with the Alliance for Affordable Energy. Again, my name is Logan Burke. We are a consumer and environmental advocacy organization working across Louisiana. And so what that means is we get involved trying to make sure that residents aren't paying more than their fair share, making sure that residents have a voice in these regulatory proceedings. We try and make sure that there are energy efficiency programs and the right to put solar on your rooftop and those kinds of things. So as Monique said, we've been working with a number of other organizations as an Energy Future New Orleans coalition. And as a coalition, we conducted a number of symposia and community meetings asking for input about what kinds of what kind of energy future people want for New Orleans. If it isn't what we have right now, what could make it better? And so out of that, we decided to put forward to the City Council not just a renewable portfolio standard or one that thinks just about the particular technology that is providing electricity, but more holistically, what are the needs of New Orleanians? What are we going to need as we recognize that the climate is continuing to change? What will make us more resilient and what is best for the people who actually live here? If you'll go to the next slide. So we asked not just for 100% renewable energy or energy efficiency. Energy efficiency, of course, is the resource that is the cheapest because it's the electron or the kilowatt hour you never have to generate. And it's also the kind of thing that keeps us healthy and safe in our homes and reduces our energy bills. So we think energy efficiency should be a major piece of this. We also think that it should be mandatory. This is what gets down into those rights. If the utility, as Entergy has recommended, simply had a voluntary standard, then it really would be entirely up to the utility to meet these goals or not. And so we believe that this needs to be a mandatory goal. And a mandatory goal would have something like a penalty associated with it. If the utility doesn't meet those goals, then they would be required to put some additional funds into programming to help bring folks up to these standards and reduce energy bills. We also think, and we recommended to the council, that the outcomes and the input should be done with equity. And what that means is we recommended working groups that would be in place over the course of the next 10 to 20 years to continue to provide input to the utility, to the council, bringing community voices into how to improve and how to implement these renewable and energy efficiency programs. But more than that, we also said we want to see that disadvantaged business entities get a part in the job growth that will come from local homegrown renewable energy and energy efficiency. And so we want to make sure that it's not just the utility that is benefiting from a different kind of an energy future. We want to make sure that the people who live here, who work here, who've been left out of the traditional energy state that Louisiana says we are actually part of this transition and have all of the benefits that should come with this. We know that that all of this work will be needs to come from local workers, and that those local workers should be compensated appropriately with living wages to do this work. We also want to see that programs to reduce bills for low-income customers. As Monique said, New Orleans has a tremendous energy burdens that an awful lot of us are carrying, really high energy bills that take up big portions of our income. And so where there are opportunities to start by reducing energy burdens and bills, those should be part and parcel of a resilient and renewable portfolio standard. So for example, we know that our summers are getting hotter. And so that means that our homes may require additional resources, whether that's electricity from our heating and cooling systems, or more weatherization to make those homes more resilient in the face of hotter and more humid summers. We know that we want dollars to go directly and first to those families who need these resources the most. If you'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So some of the tools that we've also recommended, one is community solar. And very simply, community solar is enabling individuals and businesses to own solar that doesn't necessarily have to go on your rooftop. An awful lot of us here in New Orleans are renters. In fact, the majority of New Orleanians are renters, and therefore we don't have the opportunity to put solar on our rooftop. Some of us live in beautiful old homes with tree canopies that would make it hard to put solar on our rooftops. But if we were to implement things like community solar, where we have solar gardens that could be on land scattered throughout the city of New Orleans, where people could have a piece of that investment, we think that that should be a major part of this process. Again, not just saying, hey, utility, it should be entirely up to you to invest in and to benefit from renewables. We think that community members and those businesses that will benefit from installing and maintaining these systems should be where the focus lies. Again, I talked a bit already about energy efficiency. We know, for example, that not just our homes and businesses need to be weatherized to withstand heat and cold, but we also know that our largest energy user in the city is the Sewage and Water Board. And part of that is a result of of all of the water management that Sewage and Water Board has to deal with. And so anything we can do to better manage that water, that means that's one less drop that has to be pumped. That's one less natural gas plant that has to be turned on in the city of New Orleans to do that. And that's money that's saved as well. And so the water management needs to be a part of these solutions. And finally, you can't see the very bottom of this third one, but distributed solar and storage. Monique mentioned that we have an awful lot of power outages in New Orleans. This is due to a very fragile distribution system. Those are those poles and wires and transformers that run down our neighborhood streets and to our homes. And so because these things are so vulnerable to even sunny day outages, we know that this modern technology of solar plus storage, which is being deployed all over the world now, is going to be a major tool to make sure that our homes and even places like nursing homes can maintain the service, the energy service that they need, even when the power goes out on the broader system. And so we believe that these distributed solar plus storage programs can get us there faster. Not only would it mean more resilience when the power goes out over the larger grid, it means, again, more local jobs to do these installations and build outs and maintenance. But then it also means renewable energy right here in New Orleans. If you'll go to the next slide. So as Monique said, our right to renewable energy will come with a mandate. The New Orleans City Council is considering what kind of renewable future we should have in our city, whether we should continue to depend on the nuclear plants that Entergy currently owns, or whether we should have a more innovative, local, homegrown, community-owned energy future, which is what we've recommended. And so this mandate needs to come with a lot of these other policy levers. For example, making sure, again, that disadvantaged businesses are part of this transition, making sure that low-income customers are the first to the table with energy efficiency and distributed solar to make sure that those energy burdens are reduced, and making sure that this different kind of an energy system is responsive to the realities of climate change and are adaptive to what's happening already and will happen in the future. And so the council needs to hear from you. We are expecting that the council will make some kind of a decision in the next couple of months, in December or January. We understand that the council has been hearing, of course, from Entergy and from their advisors, but these council members are elected, as Monique reminded us all. These council members are responsive, or are elected to be responsive to the people who put them in those seats. And that's you, that's all of us. If you live in New Orleans, it is your right, and it is your right to let your council members know what it is that you want to see. And it's their responsibility to represent you. So don't forget, again, you have 3 council members that you can reach out to. You've got your 2 at large, that's council member Helena Moreno and Jason Williams, and your district members. So that's districts A through C, A through E, sorry about that. And so I really want to encourage you to let them know as soon as possible what kind of energy future you want, and some of those things that are important to you, those jobs, that equity, dealing with those energy burdens, and making sure that an energy future is not just about what's good for Entergy's bottom line, but what's good for our community. And I'll stop there.
So right now we can open it up for questions. And first I want to turn over to Mama J to see if she has any remarks before doing so.
I want to thank you, because that's a lot of information. And we always find that information is the least disseminated where it's the most needed. So I think these type of coming together in a community, cultural community setting, we have to expand this. You know, I think that many times when we speak to our council people, we're not sure of all, you know, we have a single-minded issue. It might be a permit issue because we're cultural art, we're artists. But this affects, as you said, all of us. One of the things I'd like to ask is, what has already been done? I can say I was in the Pontchartrain Park area last week, and I saw these sustainable water basins. At first, I didn't know what they were. I was not aware of them. Can we talk a little bit, while we're waiting for questions to come in, about some of the things that are already happening in the city and how we can attach ourselves to those things that are happening?
Well, there's just, with, as you said, with how important information is to that, right? So as more and more neighborhood organizations and groups and people and individuals are finding out about ways in which they can make their place that they call home sustainable, they're doing it. And so whether that's protecting against reducing flood risk by through, you know, green infrastructure where the land is moved and elevated, where waters can be received, or where you might have existing wetlands or areas that can be preserved and restored, which is also a place where you can have, you know, recreation and healthful activities within the community and education among youth. We see more and more neighborhoods, when given the information and some support, are moving in that direction. We really saw it large scale in ways that kind of blew the minds of people around the country after Hurricane Katrina, which was after the storm, when people were rebuilding, they chose to go solar. And so you have this kind of ubiquitous spread of solar panels on rooftops in every neighborhood. That's not the case in most American cities, where you would often find solar panels on well-to-do, predominantly white neighborhoods. Here in New Orleans, it doesn't really matter the demographics of, you know, race or income levels, where you can, it doesn't drive the solar panels. And so there's a disconnect, right? Because we see residents doing something that's really about sustainability, health, reducing costs, right? That kind of long-term rational goals in terms of how they want to live. And we see our city council not sharing or matching that in terms of policies that affirm that kind of effort. And so you can go to Holly Grove and you'll see bioswales. You can go to the lower Ninth Ward and you can see the beginnings of the Sankofa Wetlands Park, an area that was kind of forgotten and not really tended to, but is now this kind of oasis that's in development. So we're seeing neighborhood action and people action and residents getting together and organizing. And what we're hoping is that that can grow, and we'd like to be a part of growing that into democratic action at our city council, exercising that democratic push we all have as voters and as residents to get better responses from our city council to move in this similar direction for our future. This also, I think, it's an important step, but it's a small step in terms of climate action and how we deal with the climate crisis. We're very vulnerable, as we saw and are seeing in this, you know, time period of record hurricanes. What can we be doing to take the bite out of the climate crisis in the future by reducing how we use energy today? What can we be doing in terms of, with, like as Logan was talking about, distributed solar panels that would actually make homes and renters and homeowners more resilient in rebuilding than waiting for the big giant new power plant to be constructed sometime after a storm. Those kinds of things are you know, really front and center of how we take climate action in the city. That's unique to the things that we do well, and we're seeing that in neighborhood by neighborhood. And we just need to overcome this separation that exists between city council policies and where neighborhoods are leading.
One of the things I think is really important is where the language of policies can sound kind of dry, but their impacts are undeniable. So for example, because New Orleans, as Monique said, because so many New Orleanians have already invested their own money in rooftop solar, it means that the city council has an awful lot of constituents who care an awful lot about how they're credited for the value of that energy that they generate. And this is why it's so important that New Orleans has this authority. The rest of the state, the rules have been changed about the value of the solar that people who are generating on their rooftop even receive on their bill. And so here in New Orleans, the city council thus far has made it clear that they want to protect that. And I would imagine it's because such a huge number of their constituents have solar, want to protect that investment, and want to continue to save money. New Orleans is, in fact, over the last number of years, we've been in the top 5, and in fact, I'm sorry, the top 10. And as recently as 4 years ago, before other states really took off, we were in the top 5 of solar cities in the entire country. We have more solar per capita than Los Angeles. And so that kind of power, that's real people power. And so that's a real voting block when it comes to decisions that happen at City Hall. And so I think it's really important to think about that kind of voice that we all have, and what that means to people who are looking for your vote. Still no questions?
I think this is really a rich conversation. As I said, getting this information out is really important. I know that there were incentives for individuals to place solar panels because that can be quite expensive. We know also that we have an aging population. Our city is going through a crisis right now with income. There's always the fight over the dollar and the power of that dollar and our community, the people.
Yeah.
What's being done right now to ensure that Louisiana residents, as you said, we are in the top 10, and there was an incentive to get solar panels. I think that has expired. Or am I right about that? Or what's going on with that right now?
You are correct. There was a very generous tax incentive at the state level that the state legislature ended a couple of years ago. And as you can imagine, that slowed the growth of solar because that state tax credit combined with the federal tax credit meant that it was very cost effective for folks to invest their money in solar. At the same time as those tax credits are now ended at the state and reducing at the federal level, the costs of solar have plummeted. In the last 7 years, the cost of solar installations has come down something like 78%, and they're still falling. And so this is one of those stories that those incentives, while they're starting to go away, there's still very much a need for them to continue in different ways. And so alongside these recommendations that we've made about the particular kind of energy that we need to be moving toward, and the people whose access to that energy needs to be supported first and foremost, we've also made recommendations about specific kinds of programs and incentives that the council could direct Entergy to develop that could help us move much faster, much faster than just Entergy deploying their own capital, which is really all of ours, and ways that we could encourage more private ownership and leverage those dollars to move faster and move further for better in outcomes for everyone across the city. And so that's one of those things that the council also needs to hear, is that we want more of that people power. We want more of those opportunities. And that's entirely in the hands of the New Orleans City Council at this point.
That's a great opening to some of the things, something else that was brought up in the chat. And it is, how can we work toward making our city council more accountable for making those changes? What can we do as individuals? I always like to leave things and bring forth things that we can use as marching orders. Mm-hmm. What are some marching orders we can take to the city council?
I think the one marching order would be to get on the phones and the emails with the city council members today to talk about securing your right to a renewable energy future. That can happen. That should happen today. The city council right now is considering proposals and plans to make a decision in the next couple of months, maybe at the beginning of next year, that could either be a plan that would allow Entergy to just voluntarily make agreements, or one that would mandate and obligate Entergy to make agreements with penalties for failure. In the latter part, that means we as residents have a right to that renewable energy. So the city council hearing from each and every person about this would go a long way. I can tell you, and Logan is my witness, the city council has a utility committee that begins the formulation of policy that then goes to the full city council for consideration and final votes. At utility committee meetings, this is before the pandemic, and I don't think it's changed that much since the pandemic, but you would go to the city council chambers where 5 of the 7 city council members would convene the utility committee meeting. And you would see Entergy representatives and a few people like Logan. Where's the rest of the city, right? And what you can also, and so those would be monthly meetings. Another thing you could count on happening every month is a line of people around centers that provide support for helping them pay their bills, right? And so there's a major disconnect in terms of people who have all the burden being cut off from the solutions, right? the change that's needed. And so those city council chambers, but for Entergy representatives and folks like Logan who are fighting for affordable energy and have this expertise that they bring into trying to argue for these policies, the rest of us are missing, right? The rest of us are missing. So if we're not a utility company and we're not an affordable energy advocate, guess what? We're paying for all of this. And so decisions are being made without full democratic participation among residents. And I think we see, and you have this kind of imbalance of power in the city council in terms of a nonprofit organization like the Alliance for Affordable Energy and a big giant shareholder invested, powerhouse like Entergy on the other side. And I think that balance can change with more democratic participation. So not only should you be calling city council members, find out when those utility committee meetings are taking place. You can dial in through Zoom, you can give comments, and just let the city council members know this is what you want and that we need to change. We have to change this. In this pandemic, we saw what the repercussions are by just keeping things the way they are. It means people were facing shutoffs by Entergy in a city council that was very much delayed for several months and ordering Entergy to not do those shutoffs and forcing the Entergy to abide by a moratorium against bill cutoffs. That kind of a dynamic doesn't serve the people, right, at all. That we're waiting for the city council to respond to a great, tremendous need of folks who can't work, have to be shut in during the pandemic. And this is like the early stages, the March and April time period and into June. What are they going to do about a utility bill? Entergy was, let's cut them off. Right. And where was the city council? And so that kind of situation where our council is too often missing in action or behind the curve on making the solid, important changes and meeting the needs of people can only change when more and more people get involved. And then my last thought on your question, Mama Jamil, is this. When city council members run for office, I have not heard a platform on, I'm going to lower your bills. I'm going to take action on climate change. I'm going to move us in a better energy, innovative future that can cut bills and grow jobs. That's not part of what they campaign on. But it's a tremendous authority that not only that they have as city council members, but the amount of our city budget that goes into regulating Entergy is in the millions of dollars. And so the people are not being served by the current status quo. We all have a responsibility to change that by getting involved and talking to our city council members about what we want, what we need, and holding them to that, holding their feet to the fire.
I see a question came through. There are a few questions, and I want to welcome all of you in Zoom land who are visiting with us today, and know that this will be continued on our Facebook page. So encourage others, if they're not here today, just to take a look at it. There have been a couple of questions that have come through. One of the first was, any thoughts on what is called the city's Blue-Green Initiative? What's that about? Can you give us any insight into that initiative and how might we become active advocates?
So my understanding of this Blue-Green Initiative is about green infrastructure, which manages water, which is the blue element. So obviously New Orleans has a lot of water issues to deal with, largely from storm flooding. And so the city has invested an awful lot of money and is continuing to invest money. Plus the community is doing so to train people up to be involved in this water management. And so this Blue-Green Initiative is about training and implementing this green infrastructure to reduce the amount of pumping that's required to move water out of the city during storms. I know there are lots of organizations that are involved in training, in supporting small businesses, the Water Collaborative, Thrive, NOLA, golly, there are tons of them. And so that's what this blue-green initiative is about. To my knowledge, it is not in any way associated with renewable energy. It's purely about the water management element.
And I see that as a renewable energy issue, and that you all brought forth the point that one of the larger uses of energy is our sewage and water board plants,
That's
which
right.
is very antiquated. So it does become a renewable, it's all linked.
You got it. Isn't it all? Yeah. So the more of this blue-green initiative that is successful in reducing the need for gas or diesel-fired water pumping, the more that's more energy efficiency, and potentially that's energy that can be replaced with, as you say, more renewable energy. So you're absolutely right. Aren't we all connected?
Yeah, and that's, I think, one of the points that we all need to realize when we put renewable energy on the back burner, is that it does affect each and every one of us every day. And so each and every one of us has a responsibility to do at least one thing. One of the things, one statement came through, and as artists and culture bearers, we have a loud voice in this city. This city is a tourist city. So looking at how can we make our culture bearers, artists, and artists speak out more on these issues, linking them into what's going on. Any thoughts on things that we can do as a cultural community?
Every city council meeting opens up with some flavor of culture and artistic expression here in the city. That could be an opportunity to bring this, the need for handling the climate crisis and the solutions we have in terms of renewable energy forward. That could be done maybe through a poem at the start of a city council meeting. That could be done through a song or a dance or tribute or something along those lines. But that's just one quick practical idea in terms of I could see artists physically in the space of city council members, but it's also artists are residents, right? And so there's nothing stopping an artist from being a part of what might seem like a dry regulatory decision around kilowatt hours and megawatt hours, and think creatively about how that could be really reimagined and reconsidered from an artistic perspective. I mean, Mama Janula, how you opened this session up, I thought was just really brilliant in terms of what you said about how important the land, the people, and the culture are. And if you lose the land, you lose the people. And if you lose the people, you lose culture and you lose that trace and that sense of humanity. It'll be absent. And so bringing that, I think, into policy decisions and discussions is needed, because I think that members of the city council kind of see this as a technical, kind of over our heads, kind of work that they're involved in our operation. And it's like, no, this is really about how we live in our city and how we want to live in our city. And I think bringing that human expression through arts and culture would go a long way in terms of making the policy have a purpose.
Thank you. Thank you. I see that we have a question or a statement from Michael in our extended audience. Renewable energy for Lincoln Beach.
All right.
Here,
So
here.
That happen. Any tips for Michael on how to make that happen and what that might look like?
Do you want to go, Monique?
You want to talk about the getting involved in the Renewable Portfolio Standard and thinking through a community solar project for Lincoln Beach?
I think that would be, because that area is rich in housing.
Yes.
And a lot of those people are renters. We have apartment buildings. We have several senior centers. We have senior high-rise buildings. That might be an excellent space. Logan, you talked earlier about community solar sharing and how that area, which is large enough to develop into a solar sharing area.
Absolutely. Lincoln Beach can be, Lincoln Beach Solar. Right. Yeah. And so the renters and other residents in that area can use the energy that comes from the installation of solar panels. It doesn't have to be on the rooftop. It can be, doesn't have to be. And that community solar project is something that's only in the proposal put forward by Energy Future New Orleans Coalition. And that's something that we're asking the city council to adopt and to make, the policy, the law for the city of New Orleans, so that we all have the right to renewable energy. But that community solar idea and how that could work, whatever neighborhood you're in, and I love Michael from Lincoln Beach because it just brings the clarity in terms of what this could look like, right? Where people in Lincoln Beach can not only, have a sense of their own community and that history that's there, right? Ever present, but they can also be sharing solar power, right? So not just sweating from the sun, you are benefiting from the sunshine that sometimes can be a little bit overbearing. We know how it can be in New Orleans, but it's also a tremendous untapped source in terms of where people can make important improvements to how they live, and the money that they have at the end of the month as well can go a little bit further.
I want to, there's another question in the box, but I want to step back just a moment because we talked a lot about solar power.
Mm-hmm.
I was very surprised when I was in Hawaii that more solar power wasn't used. And back to your statement, Logan, that Louisiana is among the top 10 in the country. So I'm always surprised when I'm traveling, particularly to areas that have as much and more sun than we do. But one of the things I saw used a lot in Hawaii were wind towers.
Mm-hmm.
Is there any thing in New Orleans, in Louisiana right now, moving much more as another renewable source?
As a matter of fact, Louisiana is primed to be an amazing location for offshore wind. Offshore wind has lots of additional benefits. So there's a lot of development in the interior of the US for onshore wind. That is actually already the cheapest energy that is in the world is onshore wind. But on land in Louisiana, there isn't a lot of wind potential. And so that's why there hasn't been an awful lot of onshore wind development in Louisiana. But there is a huge opportunity for offshore wind for Louisiana. And as a matter of fact, the governor just last week asked the federal government to develop a nationwide offshore wind task force so that Louisiana can actually use our learned expertise in traditional offshore energy development to transition to something that's cleaner and better for us all. Already in New Orleans, actually out at the Michoud NASA assembly plant, there are wind development companies building wind turbines. And so we are already part of that clean energy economy. It's just we aren't benefiting from it very much yet. And so one of the things that we think is going to be really important is not just for New Orleans to become a clean energy leader and insisting that certain portions of our energy and eventually all of our energy come from renewables, but that it also be a goal for the state, which is why a lot of us are involved in climate task force work at the state level that the government or that the governor has gotten rolling. But you're absolutely right. We have an opportunity to build wind. We are also because of our engineering expertise in Louisiana, we have an opportunity to develop geothermal. There are loads of ways to generate clean, renewable energy. It's just we have to decide that we're going to do it.
Any thoughts on that, Monique?
Well, I was just going to say, I in terms of the I was just thinking to myself, like if people would need to know exactly where that would be located. And so when Logan is referring to offshore wind, so that's along the Louisiana border, along the Gulf of Mexico. So that's where the siting of the wind turbines could be located. And the last thing I just want to mention is that there's some offshore wind, was it off of Massachusetts? Somewhere in the Northeast. I'm sorry?
It's Block Island, it's Rhode Island, off the coast of
Rhode Island, where the platform, because the The technical hurdle or engineering hurdle around offshore is how would you build it so that it can handle, just the dynamic forces of ocean water, right? And well, we do that well with the platforms built for oil wells for exploration and production. So those outside of Rhode Island are built on the foundation structures from Louisiana engineers who've been doing that work for oil and gas industries. So in terms of like the translation or the transitioning from one to the other, we kind of have some of the important fundamentals already locked down. It's just a matter of making the switch and having the will to do it.
And I think that as we looked at the past election, one of the things that was a sore point or that was used against renewable energy was how it was going to kill jobs. It was going to take away from the oil industry, which is a major funder for this state and in the United States. So bringing forth those points to our community, this is not a loss, but this
It's
is
not a loss, and
win.
it's not a loss at all. And it's about preparing for our future. And either we're going to be leading it or we're just going to be left in the dust.
Yeah.
Just a few, was it last week or thereabouts, Shell announced the closure of its refinery in Convent. An entire oil refinery shut down by the company because it's no longer profitable. And so we're seeing that with the kind of the last days of coal and now how that's moving into oil and gas, that renewable energy is really our future. The Department of Energy has recognized that renewable energy and energy efficiency are the leading job growth sector in the United States, right after healthcare. So this is something that we really need to be, as Logan said, not only primed for, but jumping into in Louisiana. What are we going to say to the workers when more Shells and more Exxons close their oil refineries? There's nothing to transition to. There's nothing to do with that. We could be making those steps now.
And
exactly. Go ahead, Logan.
And just one more little piece of information is that we have been told over and over that we are this energy state, and that oil and gas is not only about our jobs, which of course Monique just mentioned are already going away in that oil and gas sector. But we've also been told over and over that so much of our state's income and money is tethered to oil and gas. And it turns out that the number is now something like, let's see, 4.5% of the state's total tax revenue comes from oil and gas. Only 4.5. Back in the 80s, back in the 70s, that number was much, much higher. And it was a reality that we were dependent on those things. And it's just not true anymore. And so we need to really, when we're confronted with these questions, well, what are we going to do about this thing that we're all dependent on? Really look to the numbers and say, what are the things that we are dependent on? We're dependent on our land. We're dependent on our people. We're dependent on our culture. And if we keep saying that it's only this one other industry, then we're giving up all of that richness that is so important to us all that you mentioned at the beginning.
And just to add to that, Logan, I think that's important note, and that we have been sacrificing to it, right? That's the killer, right? We have been sacrificing to it. Cancer Alley has a name for a reason, right? And it's African-American communities by and large that are being harmed with toxic pollution because of the operation of oil and gas facilities next to many of them historic African-American communities, some of which no longer exist because of contamination. And now we also have coastal erosion to boot, and now the climate crisis, which makes each and every one of those fence line communities that much more vulnerable and setback in terms of what disaster recovery would mean. So we, front and center of all of this, yes, it makes sense economically. Yes, it makes sense in terms of looking at our future, but it also makes sense from the standpoint of protecting people, protecting lives, saving lives. This COVID-19 pandemic, if it's done nothing else, it's really sharpen the focus on how these inequities are, with Blacks dying at a rate that's 3 times higher from COVID-19. And some of that is related to chronic exposure to oil and gas pollution. So we got to change.
We got to change, and several things that I see related to that change, which will lead into our other question. But we have to do a massive media campaign, massive media campaign, because even in this forum, the reach, how do we reach every household in Louisiana? Because we need to be made more aware. For instance, the fact that we are only dependent on oil and gas for about 4% of our resources here in the state. I think that most of us, myself included, for a long time believed oil and gas was king, that it did a lot for our state. It actually is more detrimental. Getting that word out, making certain that that word comes out. The other thing that we need to know, and this was a question brought in, is how do we make this a ballot issue?
I think it's about looking at candidates and getting clear about what the platform is. Are we electing people who understand that their job is to take action on the climate crisis and ensure environmental justice for the people of Louisiana, or is it something else? It's really what we hold our candidates to, and then making those, taking that step, making sure folks are registered, mobilized to get out to vote for them.
If we wanted a true ballot measure that was different from just the candidates, there are 2 ways to go about it. Although I agree that with Monique that it really is all about the candidates, because they're not just a one-off decision or a one-off vote. Once those candidates are become elected officials, they make decision after decision that it impacts our lives for decades. But if we wanted a specific ballot measure, either we would need a champion who's currently on the council, or the council to vote for something to go onto the ballot. So for example, the way in which they have recently put the budget item related to the library on the ballot for this December. Alternatively, we would need to get a number of petition signatures to get it put on the ballot. And frankly, I'm not sure what that number is, but it's not insignificant. I think it's some percentage of the population we would need to get signatures from just to get it on the ballot, if not working through the council.
And I think the first step that comes through that is that involvement that you talked about, making those calls to city council. Doesn't cost us anything to make that call. We walk around with that cell phone all day. Take 5 minutes.
Yes,
and realize that your call is logarithmically included into what's on the mind of that person. If you call, they know that you represent a certain percentage of the city. And they look at your call as not just an individual, but as a cry from a concerted and advocacy group. So your voice, they hear Logan all the time. They hear Monique all the time. But how many times they heard from Mama Jamila? Not as many as they will in the future.
All right, I love it.
So I don't see any more questions in the chat, but I have a question. Because you two have been so actively involved in this, who are some that you can identify to us as advocates that we might be a soft touch in both local and state government? Who might be a soft touch for us to get to push forward these issues?
Well, I think every city council member is a soft touch. It's just that they don't hear, so they don't do. I really do believe that there's no one I've met, Logan, you correct me if you feel differently, on the city council who's a no on the renewable portfolio standard, who's against it, or who, I think they're all persuadable, but they need to hear from the folks that they serve. They need to hear from more people in the city of New Orleans who are looking at, how am I going to pay this Entergy bill? Who are looking at, my home is just, I'm pouring my air conditioning out into the outside because my home is not weatherized and needs to be made more energy efficient. How am I going to get support for that? Or how could I tap into community solar? Folks like, that's our city council members need to hear from you. We're not here because there's a city council member out there who is adamantly opposed to doing this. What we see is there's a lot of domination of the conversation by people like who have Entergy's interest talking to the city council. That makes sense. Their shareholders, like you're talking about, pay for that. But what's missing is more people from the city also having their voice in this. And so we have a very, limited democracy happening in our city council when it comes to our energy and what happens to, how we live in our neighborhoods and in our homes. We want to expand that. More people need to be involved weighing in. You don't have to be an expert about renewable energy or megawatts or kilowatts, but you do know what you need and what would be better for your homes. And talking to and those city council members aren't experts either. So having just real people, real talk conversation, but I can't afford another bill like this. This is almost going to make me move out of the city or lose my home. I can't afford the rent and the bill and the groceries and the medicines. Something's got to give here. And the city council can start making those urgent, necessary actions to reduce bills. And it's all of one piece. We can reduce bills, as Logan said, by going to renewable energy. Wind and solar are cheap as heck now. And it's cheaper than the fossil fuels that Entergy is currently, charging us for. We don't need that. It's also something where we, for the first time, just think about this. In your lifetime, in my lifetime, this is the first time where we could generate our own electricity. And that is something that I know is a little frightening to companies like Entergy, but you can't block the future. You can't block the innovation or the science or the technology we now have. And so being able to make it more available for people to generate and benefit from their own electricity, whether it's the sun or the wind or other renewable energy source, that's something we need to be driving towards, because if we continue down the path we are in New Orleans, we will see more detrimental consequences for our residents who are, holding on to, holding on for dear life to try to just maintain some semblance of a quality of life here in the city, because it's getting increasingly unaffordable for so many. At the same time, increasing our vulnerability to climate change.
Exactly. One of the things that, another thing that I find very interesting in this point and place in my life is realizing our need to talk to people who don't think like we do. Changing the minds of those who don't think like we do. Are there any people that you can identify, or any groups that we might talk to as individuals and as a block, that who just don't see this? Conversations that we might have in the state with people who don't see this. I know that we have people in state government who are oil, drown me and bury me in it. I need oil. Keep the pumps alive.
And there are plenty at the state level, that's for certain. I think talking to them through their constituents is another important approach, right? That they, like our city council members, have to represent their constituents. And so hearing from more constituents about this is extremely important in terms of changing their behavior. I think part of the barrier that we have is that we don't have a practice around democracy, right? It's always a heavy lift, right? This last election was proof of that. It's a heavy lift. And then when you have voter suppression on top of that, the lift becomes even heavier. So what makes it a heavy lift? I don't think my vote counts. Why? What does it really matter? No one's really talking, right? And so you have to move and mobilize and show people that there's another way, and then change their behavior. Not for do an early vote. You may not have done it before, but now you're changing your behavior. So all of those heavy lifts are extremely important to develop a practice around the exercise of democratic freedoms, right? the rights we have just don't come from on high. People have fought, as you know, Mama Jamil, and bled for it. And so we've got to exercise that right. That right to vote is one, but how do you stay engaged through the, participating in governmental decisions affecting our lives is another practice, because what it does, because the barriers that are set is the time of day. Starts at 10 o'clock. I'm working at 10 o'clock. Goes to maybe noon. Well, I'm off at lunch, but now you're closing. So so you have to deal with that barrier. And then when you get there, do you know what the resolution number is that they're up? Do you know what the agenda looks like? You only have 2 minutes. You have your comments prepared. Where do you write your comments? How do you get noticed? All of those things are steps that kind of can feel intimidating and alienating to folks who don't make a practice out of it. But I think it's about, holding people's hands. So one thing I've done is bring comment cards to a community meeting. Help people, to show people how to fill it out so they can get familiar, get comfortable with it. The folks then, begin talking about, well, I think I want to talk about this. It sounds good. How, make sure you get it in 2 minutes. And and so getting that kind of a practice involved, right, is extremely important in terms, just like the voting, like, well, how do you fill out the ballot? Can you use a ink pen, or how does the machine work? And what are the ballot initiatives? All of those steps are there at each public meeting, right? In terms of understanding that agenda and how to comment on it and how to have your say. The last piece that's extremely important, besides those kind of formal demonstrations of expression, whether it's in a vote or speaking during a public comment period at a city council meeting or a state legislative committee meeting, is talking one-on-one, having email correspondence with those elected officials. That might be the easiest way for folks to step in. Just having, I'd like to talk to Mrs. So-and-so or Mr. So-and-so about this particular matter. Getting an appointment, going in, talking, or on the phone or email is direct interface. There's nothing stopping or requiring you to have that communication any particular kind of way. And you can just have this real human to human conversation and let them know how you feel and what you want.
Logan, would you like to chime in on that?
Oh boy, I just feel like Monique said it so right. Just remembering that if we want to say we're living in a democracy, which means if we want to live in a democracy, democracy doesn't just happen when you fill out a ballot. It happens every day. Some people like to say that they vote with their pocketbook. I like to say that I vote every day with the decisions I make to interact with those people that I voted for and those people that I didn't vote for. I think it's so easy to forget that even if it's not your person, even if it isn't someone that you supported initially, it's their job to represent you anyway. And so making sure, that you're also talking with those folks in your family, in your friend group. I think that question that you put to us, Mama J, how do we mount a campaign to make sure that people have this information? Those stories that I like to say, the stories we tell ourselves, they only happen because we keep repeating them. And if we're not setting the record straight with our own family members, with our own friends, in our own congregations for that matter, then we're perpetuating some falsehoods perhaps. And so I think it's important that we have these kind of honest conversations with people around us as well.
Thank you. This has been an amazing amount of valuable information passed along in a very short period. Again, I want to thank Logan and Monique for just sharing with us so much information. But I know that their journey has not ended. They are on this path, and as we say, we are in it to win it. Ashe Cultural Arts Center for taking a lead in this and knowing that as a cultural arts institute, We serve a purpose beyond a plate. We serve people. And in order to serve people, we have to serve them in every particular need and aspect of their lives, maintaining those lives. I want to think a little bit as we wrap up. You've given us a lot of action steps. I'm thinking, you said, for instance, talking to our family members. That works, y'all. It works. My sister, the bottled water queen, said to me this week, and I've been talking to her for years. It's not, you got to be in it to win it, for years. And every time she brings forth another 3 cases of water, I talk to her again and I say, and I talk to her about the sustainability of that, how we are leaving for generations in the future. Something that, even though it may say biodegradable, recyclable, that in itself puts a burden on the earth. My sister said to me this week, I am going to stop buying bottled water. It works to have these conversations with individuals. And it doesn't matter that you've had this conversation one time. You have this conversation until the message is heard and it works. We're going into a season of giving thanks and remembering our Indigenous brothers and sisters and those who have laid this land, our Indigenous brothers and sisters who honored the land. Have these conversations in your Zoom greeting, in your Zoom Indigenous Peoples Day meals. I'm assuming that all of you are following COVID-19 restrictions and we're not having any large parties in our homes. So I'm saying in whatever way you greet one another during this period, that a conversation is brought up about sustainability. In our homes, how many styrofoam plates do we use? In our homes, how many bottles of water do we use and throw away daily? In our homes, how many paper napkins? How many paper towels? On that phone, making that call. Make that call and making it happen. So some of the things that we can do as individuals, small lifts. But I don't want to have the final words. I want to leave the final words to our 2 guests, our experts and those who have been marching this march a long time. So Logan, Monique, I'd like to have you all just chime in.
Well, I just want to thank you, Mama J, and the Ashe Cultural Arts Center for taking the initiative to have a Climate Action Week. I think you are setting a new standard in terms of the ways in which arts, culture bearers can make a big difference around handling our climate crisis here in New Orleans and in the state we live in here in Louisiana. And thank you for making the work that we do a part of this. So we appreciate all of the love and care and support we had getting this Zoom meeting together. And we just thank you in terms of looking at where this can go beyond this session today, how we can carry this forward. I'm really jazzed about what you said about a massive media campaign that's needed, where people can just make that call and let people know what's on their minds and what they'd like to see done in the city of New Orleans. That call is the equivalent of a vote. After you vote, now make that call. And it continues right from there. Go to that meeting, get that information. It's all of one piece in terms of how we can live to our fullest potential in a city that respects who we are and that hears from us. That's important. So thank you.
Thank you, Monique.
Just very, very briefly, I want to extend deep gratitude to Ashe, to you, Mama J, to all of the culture bearers and artists out there who may listen to this, who make New Orleans, who make Louisiana as great as it is. You are the reason we fight. you are the reason that it's worth fighting for a different kind of an energy future, a different kind of a people-centered future. And I just want to thank you for the work that you do that fuels that fire, but also the work that you will do to tell these stories. We always fight for the things that we care about, and it happens so often that when a culture ignites around something that's very, very meaningful, it's not until the culture picks it up and carries that banner that it really settles into a cultural consciousness. And so I want to thank you preemptively for the work that you will do and that you've already done to preserve the future of New Orleans. So thank you.
Thank you. As we said, it's here, y'all. The day is here. We have to start today with what we can do. And in keeping with that, Ashe is hosting a week-long series of discussions, such as the rich discussion you just heard, film showings, panels, conversations you involved, all in a week of activism based around climate and environment. A week of activism, losing Louisiana, the land, people, and culture. In keeping with that, tonight, we have a film screening that will be hosted. We do have 25 seats. I don't know how many are still available for a physically distanced screening of Survival by Zip Code. Zip Code has been brought to the front some years back when we talked about Place Matters. You've heard about Cancer Alley, renamed Death Valley, because there are not just cancers, but series and multiple illnesses that are brought about by living in such toxic environments. We all know about homes built on land dumps, usually built in the areas of those who are most disenfranchised. So these conversations will continue. So I invite you to join us tonight. It will be live streamed on Facebook, and we will have 25 open seats at our Ashe Cultural Arts Center at 1712 Aretha Castle Haley, located in Central City, New Orleans. Please go to our webpage, Ashe Nola, ASHENOLA.org, to get more information on all that's going on. Know that we appreciate your support. One, just chiming in. We appreciate your support in joining us as members to help us to continue this fight. Yes, your $25 makes a difference. Your $250,000 makes a difference. And definitely your $2.5 million makes a difference. So we want to invite you all to join us. We want you to lift your voice, but open your pocketbooks. So Logan and Monique, before we close, I think we got about 5 more minutes. Just let our people know how they can get in touch with you to be more actively involved with the organizations that you support, please.
So my organization is the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, and we're a member of the Energy Future New Orleans Coalition. You can find us on the web, Deep South Center for Environmental Justice at dscej.org. And I'm going to turn it over to Logan to give you her organization website, as well as that of the Energy Future New Orleans Coalition.
Thanks so much. Yep. I'm with the Alliance for Affordable Energy, And you can check us out at all4energy.org. And if you want some more information about the Energy Future New Orleans Coalition, it's efno.org. You can think of it when you're trying to think about what it is that you want and what it is that you don't want. It's fno.org. So check out all the information about the Renewable Portfolio Standard at efno.org.
So again, I want to thank Ashe Cultural Arts Center, my home, the home of my children, for having the foresight, and our Chief Executive Officer, our Chief Equity Officer, as she calls herself, Asale Divine Ecclesiastes, for the vision and foresight to put this on the radar for us. I want to thank today Carol Sloan Bookbinder, who is one of our sisters in the journey at Ashe, who was the driving force between putting this together, pulling together all the amazing organizations, films, and people you're going to hear speak this week. I also want to thank one of the newer members of our staff, Morgan Malin Grant, who has come in and is our tech guru. And she has been instrumental in setting this up for us and seeing that the stream happens, that the questions are coming through. Thank you for your work. And always to Frederick Wood Delahousse, who is just a voice in our community and who has been there for us as our Chief Cultural Officer. I see Asale has joined us. She was on a brief call. So I want to give her the final closing thoughts for today. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mama Jamila, and especially thank you to you, Monique, and to you, Logan. The insight that you guys bring to this work and this conversation, and just holding the torch in a space where, like you highlighted, so many of us are not paying as close attention as we should be. And so we make a commitment to you that we will be partners in this fight with you, that we will do our best to educate our folks and I really think this is a participatory budgeting kinds of conversation. And, there are so many issues that this links to that are of importance, of grave importance to the cultural community. And so we look forward to joining hands and linking arms with you to be part of this fight and to have a holistic and equitable way of being as New Orleanians, and showing an example for the whole world about how it really can be. And thank you both tremendously for your efforts and for your willingness to share with us today and always.
Thank you.
And thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Please look out for the rest of this week's events, and please look out for opportunities to participate with the efforts that have been talked about and celebrated here today. And we are going to provide lots more opportunities for you to link up, and we will be looking for you on those front lines. Thank you, Mama Jamila, for your gracious wisdom as always. And we'll see y'all later this evening for the film.
All right.
So long, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.